Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel back to medieval England, to a world of candlelit chambers and herb gardens, of physicians in long robes and old books full of confident advice, and we are going to ask a rather lovely question. What did they do in that distant age when a person could not stop worrying? For the troubled mind is not a modern invention. People have always lain awake in the dark with their thoughts turning over and over, and the medieval world, faced with this most human of afflictions, reached for the remedies it had: strange herbs and pleasant smells, harmonious music and cheerful company, precious stones and quiet prayer, and a great deal of advice that ranges from the surprisingly wise to the completely ridiculous. Tonight we are going to wander gently through all of it. Now, before you get comfortable, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always 2 in the morning somewhere, and thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. You know who you are. And if this channel helps you drift off to sleep, tap the like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. No pressure at all. I will be here regardless, talking quietly in the dark about the long, strange history of how people used to live. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for some sweet background hum, and get comfortable, because we have a long and gentle journey ahead of us tonight, back through the centuries to the medieval world and its curious cures for a troubled mind. Have you ever wondered what a person in the Middle Ages did when their thoughts would not settle, when the worry came in the small hours and would not let them rest? Have you ever wondered what a medieval physician would have prescribed for a mind that could not stop turning? Have you ever wondered whether, buried in all that strange old advice, there might be something we have forgotten and might do well to remember? These are the things we are going to drift through tonight, slowly and gently, in the dark, the curious and comforting world of the medieval cure for a troubled mind. The first thing to understand, and it is a rather comforting thing, is that the people of the medieval world knew exactly what it was to worry. They had no word that maps neatly onto our own, no diagnosis, no clinic to visit, but they knew the feeling. They wrote about it. They complained of it. They sought remedies for it. And across 700 years, their descriptions of the troubled mind are so familiar that you could lift them out of an old manuscript and drop them into a conversation today, and nobody would notice anything strange at all. The medieval writers described a mind that would not settle, thoughts that circled and returned, a heaviness of spirit, a fearfulness without clear cause, a sleeplessness in which the same worries turned over and over through the long hours of the night. They wrote of people who could not be comforted, who feared things that had not happened and might never happen, who felt a weight upon the chest and a disquiet in the belly. They knew the person who could not rest, who startled easily, who found no pleasure in things that once gave pleasure. All of this they observed and recorded and tried to explain in the terms their world made available to them. They had various names for what they saw. Melancholy was one, a word that has since drifted in meaning, but that then described something broad and heavy, a settled sorrow or fearfulness of the spirit. There were words for the heaviness of heart, for the restless mind, for the fear that has no object. The medieval physician would have recognized the person who lay awake worrying, and would have had a name for their condition, and a theory about its cause, and a shelf of remedies to offer. That the names and theories were quite different from our own does not change the fact that they were looking at something real, something we would recognize at once. What this tells us, and it is worth holding gently, is that the troubled mind is not a modern affliction, not a product of our screens or our cities or our restless age. People worried in the Middle Ages. They worried in the ancient world. They have worried, we may be quite sure, for as long as there have been people at all. The particular things they worried about were different, of course. The medieval peasant did not lie awake fretting about an email, but the shape of the worry, the turning and returning of the anxious mind in the small hours, was precisely the same, and has always been the same, and is one of the oldest and most human things there is. There is real comfort in that, I think, for anyone who has ever lain awake in the dark with their thoughts. You are not suffering from a modern disease, not broken by a modern world, not uniquely afflicted. You are doing something that human beings have done in every century, in every land, under every kind of roof. The medieval farmer lay awake worrying about the harvest. The medieval mother lay awake worrying about her children. The medieval monk lay awake worrying about his soul, and they too wondered how to make it stop, and reached about in the dark for something that might help. Let that comforting thought settle gently in the dark. We turn now to what the medieval physician believed was actually happening inside you. To understand the medieval cure for a troubled mind, we must first understand the medieval theory of what a mind, and indeed a body, actually was. And here we encounter one of the great and magnificently wrong ideas of human history, an idea so elegant, so comprehensive, and so completely mistaken that it governed European medicine for the better part of 2,000 years. It was the theory of the four humours, and it is where every medieval remedy for worry begins. The theory held that the human body contained four fluids, called humours, and that health consisted in their proper balance. There was blood, which was hot and moist. There was phlegm, which was cold and moist. There was yellow bile, which was hot and dry, and there was black bile, which was cold and dry. Everything about a person, their health, their temperament, their moods, their illnesses, was explained by the proportions of these four substances within them. A person with an excess of blood was sanguine, cheerful and ruddy. An excess of yellow bile made one choleric, quick to anger. An excess of phlegm made one phlegmatic, calm and slow, and an excess of black bile made one melancholic. Melancholy, then, that heaviness of spirit and fearfulness of mind, was believed to be caused by an excess of black bile, a cold and dry substance accumulating in the body and darkening the temperament. This was not a metaphor. The medieval physician believed there was an actual substance, black bile, physically present in the body, and that too much of it made a person fearful and sorrowful. The anxious, worrying, sleepless person was not thought to be suffering from anything in the mind at all. They were suffering from a surplus of a cold, dry fluid, and the cure was to correct the balance. We should pause to admire this, in a way, because it is a beautiful piece of reasoning. It explained everything. It connected the body to the temperament, and the temperament to the seasons, and the seasons to the elements. It had rules and correspondences and a satisfying internal logic. Physicians could reason from it, prescribe from it, predict from it. It was a complete and coherent system, and it was wrong from top to bottom. Black bile does not exist. It never existed. It was a phantom invented by the ancients and inherited by the medievals, and every single treatment built upon it was a treatment for an imaginary substance. And yet, and this is where it becomes genuinely interesting, some of the treatments worked, not because the theory was right, but because the treatments happened, by accident, to be sensible things to do. If black bile was cold and dry, then the cure was warmth and moisture. Warm baths, warm food, pleasant company, music, sunlight, gentle exercise, rest, cheerful surroundings. The medieval physician, reasoning from an entirely fictional premise, arrived at a great deal of advice that a modern doctor might recognize with a slow nod. They were right, in places, for entirely wrong reasons, and there is something rather wonderful about that. Let that elegant, mistaken theory settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the physicians themselves and the strange world of their consulting rooms. Let us imagine, gently, that you are a person of the 14th century, and that your thoughts will not settle. You have lain awake 3 nights running. A weight sits on your chest. You cannot say what you fear, only that you fear it. And so, if you have the means, You go to see a physician. Let us follow you into that room and see what happens. For the medieval consultation was a thing of great ceremony and remarkable confidence, and almost none of it was any use whatsoever. The physician was a learned man, and he wanted you to know it. He wore long robes, often furred, and a distinctive cap. He spoke Latin, or at least sprinkled it liberally through his speech. He had studied at a university, where he had read the ancient authorities, Galen above all, and he regarded his knowledge as descending from those authorities in an unbroken line of wisdom. He was not, and this is important, a man who examined things and drew conclusions. He was a man who knew what the books said and applied it. The books were very old and very confident, and he did not question them. His first act would very likely be to inspect your urine. This was the great diagnostic ritual of medieval medicine, performed with enormous seriousness. You would provide a sample in a special glass flask, shaped rather like a bladder, and the physician would hold it up to the light and study its colour, its cloudiness, its sediment, sometimes its smell, and, if he were particularly thorough, and you were particularly unlucky, its taste. From this he would determine the balance of your humours. There were elaborate charts, wheels of urine colours ranging through 20 shades, each corresponding to a condition. He would consult these charts. He would nod gravely. He might also examine your pulse and take account of the stars, for astrology was woven deeply into medieval medicine, and no serious physician would prescribe without considering the heavens. The position of the planets governed the humours. Certain treatments were effective only under certain signs. The moment of your birth shaped your constitution and therefore your disease. He would ask when you were born. He would consult his tables. He would consider whether the moon was favourable for the treatment he had in mind, and if it was not, he would wait. And then he would tell you with total confidence that you had an excess of black bile, and he would prescribe. The prescription might involve herbs or diet or music or bleeding, or a change of surroundings or a precious stone worn against the skin, or all of these together. He would charge you handsomely. You would go away believing yourself in expert hands, and the whole magnificent edifice of it, the Latin and the flask and the star charts and the grave nodding, rested upon a fluid that did not exist, diagnosed by a method that revealed nothing, in accordance with a heaven that had no opinion on the matter. It is a marvel of human confidence, the medieval consultation, and one can only admire the sheer conviction of it. He believed every word. That is the strangest part, and the most human. He was not a fraud. He was simply the inheritor of a very old mistake, delivered with impeccable manners and a straight face, and he charged accordingly. Let that grave and useless consultation settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the herbs he might have given you. Among the first things the medieval physician would reach for, and among the most enduring, were the herbs. The medieval herb garden was a pharmacy, and the medieval herbal, those great old books listing plant after plant with its virtues and uses, contained a long roll of plants believed to quiet a troubled mind. Some of these are plants we still associate with calm today. Some are plants that would do you real harm. Let us wander through the herb garden gently and look without touching. The great calming herbs of the medieval world included several that remain familiar. Lavender, sweet and grey-green, was valued for the calm it was thought to bring, its scent believed to soothe the spirits and settle the head. Chamomile, that small daisy-like flower, was long associated with rest and quiet. Valerian, with its heavy, strange, unlovely smell, was reputed to bring sleep. Lemon balm, mint, rose and violet all appear in the old lists as plants that gladden the heart and lift the spirits. These are gentle plants, and their reputations have proved durable, and there is a pleasant continuity in the fact that a person today might drink a chamomile tea before bed, for reasons a medieval herbalist would recognize. But the medieval herbal was not a safe book. Alongside the lavender and the chamomile sat plants of real potency and real danger, prescribed with the same confidence and the same lack of understanding. There were plants that could stop a heart. There were plants that brought visions and confusion and, in the wrong quantity, death. The line between a soothing dose and a fatal one was, for several of these plants, a matter of a very small margin indeed, and the medieval practitioner had no reliable way of knowing where that line fell. Preparations varied, plants varied, people varied, and so a remedy that quieted one patient might kill another, and nobody quite knew why. I am not going to tell you which plants, and I am not going to tell you how they were prepared, and I would ask you very sincerely not to go looking. This is one of those corners of history that is fascinating to peer into, and genuinely dangerous to enter. Some of the plants in the old herbals are growing in hedgerows today, and they are every bit as dangerous now as they were then, and people are still occasionally poisoned by them. We shall admire the medieval herb garden from the gate, and we shall not go rummaging in the beds. That is the sensible course, and the one I would gently urge upon you. What we may take from the herb garden, though, is something rather lovely, and it has little to do with pharmacology. The medieval herb garden was a walled and ordered place, full of green growing things and sweet smells and the low humming of bees. It was quiet. It was tended slowly, with patient hands, through the turning of the seasons, and I suspect, though I cannot prove it, that a great many troubled people in the Middle Ages felt better after an hour spent in such a garden, and that the benefit had rather more to do with the walls and the green and the bees and the quiet than with anything they picked. That is a thought we shall return to, gently, before the night is through. Let that walled green garden settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the medieval faith in sweet smells. Closely bound up with the herbs, and in some ways more important, was the medieval faith in smell. For the medieval physician believed, with total sincerity, that smells acted directly upon the body and the spirits, that foul smells caused disease and sweet smells cured it, and that a person of troubled mind might be substantially improved by being made to sniff something pleasant. This was a whole theory of medicine conducted through the nose, and it produced some of the more charming remedies of the age. The reasoning ran roughly thus. Bad air, corrupted air, air that stank, was thought to carry disease and to disorder the humours. This was the theory of miasma, and it dominated medieval thinking about illness. Foul smells were not merely unpleasant, they were actively dangerous, evidence and cause of corruption. It followed, with a certain logic, that sweet smells were actively beneficial, that they purified the air and strengthened the spirits and restored the body's balance. And so the medieval world went about carrying flowers. The remedies that flowed from this were pleasant enough. A person troubled in mind might be given a posy, a small bunch of sweet-smelling flowers and herbs, to carry and to hold to the nose. There were pomanders, little perforated spheres of gold or silver, filled with aromatic substances, worn on a chain and lifted to the face when the air displeased or the spirits sank. Rooms were strewn with sweet rushes and herbs, so that they released their scent when trodden upon. Rosewater was sprinkled. Sweet woods were burned. The wealthy medieval household smelled, at least in its better rooms, of a great many flowers, all deployed with medical intent. For the anxious and the sleepless in particular, the sweet-smelling remedies clustered thickly: lavender under the pillow, rose petals, a pomander of aromatic gums held to the nose before bed, sweet-smelling waters dabbed upon the temples. There was a whole literature of what one might smell to encourage sleep and quiet the mind, and the medieval reader took it entirely seriously, as a physician's prescription rather than a pleasant indulgence. To sniff a rose was medicine. There is one detail here I cannot resist, which is that the medieval world believed a bad smell could be driven off by a good one, and applied this with total confidence during the plague, when physicians walked about with their noses buried in bunches of flowers, and the famous beaked mask, which came rather later, was stuffed with sweet herbs for exactly this reason. It did not save a single life. But you may picture, if you like, a man in the 14th century walking through the worst thing that ever happened to Europe, with his face pressed into a posy of roses, and understand something about human beings that no amount of medical history will teach you. And here again, the accidental wisdom. The theory was wrong. Smells do not purify air, and miasma is not how disease travels. But the scent of lavender at bedtime is a real and pleasant thing, and there is a modest modern literature on the calming effects of certain scents, and, more to the point, the ritual of holding something sweet-smelling to your face and breathing slowly and deliberately in the quiet before sleep is a rather good thing to do, whatever the mechanism. The medieval physician prescribed slow breathing of a pleasant smell in a quiet room and called it a treatment for excess black bile, and was entirely wrong about why it helped, and it probably did help a little all the same. Let those sweet posies settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the medieval faith in music. Of all the medieval remedies for a troubled mind, the one they believed in most passionately, and the one that has aged the best, is music. For the medieval world held music to be not merely a pleasure, but a genuine medicine, capable of ordering a disordered soul, and physicians prescribed it as readily as they prescribed herbs. It is perhaps the loveliest of their remedies, and the one where their instincts, however oddly reasoned, ran closest to the truth. The medieval theory of music was grand and strange and rather beautiful. Music was understood to be a matter of proportion and number, and the same proportions that governed a well-made melody were thought to govern the movements of the heavens and the balance of the human body. The ancients had written of the music of the spheres, the inaudible harmony produced by the turning of the planets. Earthly music, the music of voices and strings, was held to be an echo of that cosmic order. And so, when a person's inner harmony was disturbed, when the soul was disordered and the spirits troubled, it followed that harmonious music, rightly chosen, could restore the proper proportion. Music tuned the soul as one tunes a string. The prescription varied. Gentle, ordered, harmonious music was recommended for the melancholic and the fearful. Music of soft instruments, the harp and the lute above all, played slowly and sweetly. Certain modes were thought to have certain effects, some rousing, some soothing, some fit for sorrow and some for joy. The physician might advise that the troubled patient be played to in the evening, in a warm room, or that they be encouraged to sing, or to hear singing. King Saul, in the old story, was soothed of his troubled spirit by David's harp, and the medieval world took this not as poetry, but as clinical precedent. Music was treatment. And here is the thing, it works. Not in the way they thought, not by realigning the cosmic proportions of the soul, but it works. That slow, quiet, gentle music calms a troubled person is one of the least controversial things one can say. It is a real effect, and a substantial one, and any of us who has put on something soft and slow at the end of a hard day knows it perfectly well, without needing to be told. The medieval physician, reasoning from the music of the spheres, arrived at a piece of advice that is genuinely sound, and that a modern person might benefit from tonight. There is something rather moving in this when one considers it. 700 years ago, a man in a furred robe, holding a flask of urine and consulting a chart of planetary positions, would tell a frightened, sleepless person that what they needed was to sit somewhere warm in the evening and listen to something slow and gentle, played upon a soft instrument. And he was right. He was right for entirely the wrong reasons, out of a theory of the universe that was nonsense from beginning to end. But he was right, and the person went home and sat by the fire and listened to a harp, and felt a little better, as we would feel a little better, as people have always felt a little better. Let that slow harp music settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the stones they wore against the skin. We come now to a remedy that has aged rather less gracefully, and that is very silly indeed, and that I confess I find entirely charming. The medieval faith that particular stones, worn against the body, would quiet a troubled mind. This was not a fringe belief or a peasant superstition. It appears in serious medical texts, prescribed by learned physicians, alongside the herbs and the music. The medieval world genuinely believed that a stone could cure your worry. The old books, called lapidaries, listed the stones and their virtues, and there were a great many of them, each with its properties carefully catalogued. Certain stones were held to bring courage, others to dispel fear, others to bring sleep, others to guard against bad dreams or to drive away sorrow. The stone might be worn as a ring, or set in a pendant against the breastbone, or simply carried. Some were to be worn on particular fingers, or under particular stars, or against the bare skin rather than over cloth, and these details were specified with great precision, as though precision could rescue a proposition that was doomed from the start. The reasoning, insofar as there was reasoning, held that stones possessed inherent virtues, powers naturally belonging to them, as fire naturally rises and stones naturally fall. A stone was not inert, it had a nature, an active quality, and that quality could act upon a body held near it. Some stones drew things out, some radiated influence, some were sympathetic to particular planets and channeled their power. This was not, in medieval terms, magic exactly, or at least not always. It was natural philosophy, an account of how the world was made, and the stones were part of the same great ordered system as the humours and the spheres. It did not work, I feel confident in saying this. No stone, worn on any finger, under any star, against any skin, has ever cured anyone's anxiety through any inherent virtue of its own, because stones do not have inherent virtues, and this is one of those places where the medieval world was simply, comprehensively, and rather magnificently mistaken. The lapidaries were beautiful books full of confident nonsense, and the physicians who prescribed from them were prescribing nothing at all. And yet, if I am honest, I can imagine a frightened person in the 14th century, given a smooth, cool stone by a grave and learned man who assured them that it would guard against fear, and I can imagine them wearing it against their breastbone and touching it in the dark when the worry rose, and feeling a little steadied by it, not because the stone did anything, because they had something to hold, and someone had told them it would help, and in the dark of the small hours a person will hold on to what they are given. The stone did nothing, the holding did something. There is a whole world of human comfort in that distinction, and we shall come back to it. Let that cool, smooth stone settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the darker side of medieval treatment, and I shall be brief. I have promised you an honest wonder, and so I must tell you, gently and without dwelling, that not all of the medieval cures were harmless. Some of them hurt people. It would be dishonest to present the medieval sick room as a place of lavender and harp music alone, and I shall not do so. But I shall be brief about it, and I shall not linger, and there is nothing here to trouble your sleep. The great one, the treatment that dominated European medicine for centuries, and that flowed directly from the theory of the humours, was bloodletting. If disease was an excess of some humour, then removing some of the patient's blood would restore the balance. It was applied to almost everything, including the melancholy and the fearful, and it was performed constantly and confidently. The physician would determine, from his charts and his stars, how much blood to draw, and from which vein, and the blood would be drawn. The patient, needless to say, did not improve. They became weaker, and their weakness was sometimes taken as evidence that more treatment was required. There were purges and emetics, Medicines designed to empty the body from one end or the other, likewise intended to expel the offending humour, likewise useless, likewise weakening. There were treatments applied to the head. There were regimens of near starvation. And in the darker corners, for those whose distress was severe enough to alarm their neighbours, there were confinements and restraints and treatments that we would now recognise as simple cruelty, dressed in the language of medicine. I shall say no more about those than that they happened, and that they were terrible, and that the people they happened to deserved far better than they got. The tragedy of it, and it is a real tragedy, is that all of this was done in complete sincerity by people who believed they were helping. The physician who bled a frightened patient until they fainted was not a villain. He was applying the best knowledge his age possessed, knowledge that had been handed down from antiquity and confirmed by authorities he had no reason to doubt. He was doing his level best, and his level best was actively harmful, and the patient would have been better off if he had done nothing at all and gone home and left them to sit quietly in a garden. We can hold two things at once here. We can find the medieval world charming, and its herb gardens lovely, and its harp music genuinely soothing, and we can also be extremely glad that we do not live there. For if you were badly frightened in the 14th century, and your family had money, and you were placed in the care of the finest physician in the county, you would be worse off than if they had left you alone. That is the honest truth of it, and it is worth remembering when we grow too romantic about the past. Let that sober note settle gently, and then let it go entirely. We turn now, and shall stay for the rest of our night in far pleasanter territory. Here is a piece of medieval medical advice that is so sensible and so lovely that it is worth pausing over properly. The medieval physician, faced with a patient whose spirits were low and whose mind was fearful, would very often prescribe, in complete seriousness and as a medical treatment, the company of cheerful people, not as a nice idea, as a prescription. And he was, of course, entirely right. The old regimens are quite specific about it. The melancholy person should not be left alone. They should not brood in solitude, or sit in dark rooms, or dwell upon sorrowful things. They should be surrounded by pleasant, cheerful, good-humoured companions. They should be told amusing stories. They should hear laughter. They should be gently drawn into conversation and company and diversion. The physician might specify that the patient's friends attend upon them, that a merry person be found to sit with them, that they be taken among people rather than left to themselves. Solitude was regarded as actively dangerous to the fearful mind, and company as a medicine. The reasoning was humoral, naturally. Melancholy was cold and dry, joy was warm and moist. Therefore cheerfulness warmed and moistened the patient, dispersing the black bile, restoring the balance. Laughter was thought to move the spirits and warm the blood. Delightful sights and sounds and conversations were held to have a real, physical, restorative effect upon the humours. It is nonsense as physiology, and it is entirely sound as advice, which is a pattern we have met before tonight, and shall meet again. For it is true, solitude is bad for the anxious mind, and company is good for it, and this is one of the most robust things anyone knows about the troubled human spirit. The worried person left alone in a dark room with their thoughts will find those thoughts growing larger and stranger and more insistent, circling and returning, feeding on the silence. And the same person, sat among friends at a table, hearing familiar voices and easy laughter, will find that the same thoughts have somehow shrunk, have become manageable, have receded to a proper size. Nothing has changed except the company. Everything has changed. The medieval physician knew this. He did not know why, and his explanation was wrong, and he probably followed the prescription with something dreadful involving a lancet. But he knew that the frightened person should not be left alone, and he wrote it down as a treatment, and he meant it. There is real wisdom in that, wisdom that predates every theory that has been used to explain it. and that will outlast every theory yet to come. Sit with people. Let them talk. Listen to the laughter. It helps. It has always helped. And a man in a furred robe 700 years ago would tell you the very same thing. Let that warm company settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the medieval regimen of daily life, which is the very heart of our story. We come now to the center of the medieval understanding of health, and to the part of our story that is genuinely, unexpectedly, rather wise. For alongside the humours and the bleedings and the star charts, the medieval physician possessed a framework for daily living, a set of 6 things which, properly managed, would preserve health and, badly managed, would ruin it. They were called, in the peculiar terminology of the age, the 6 non-natural things, and they are a remarkably good list. The 6 were these: air, food and drink, sleep and waking, movement and rest, the things that are taken in and put out, and the passions of the mind. Every one of these, the physician taught, must be kept in proper measure. Too much or too little of any would disturb the humours and sicken the body and trouble the spirit. Health lay in the management of daily life, in the ordinary business of what you breathed and ate and how you slept and moved and felt. The physician's greatest work was not the dramatic cure, but the daily regimen, the proper ordering of an ordinary life. Consider what this actually amounts to, translated out of the medieval and into the plain. It says, get good air, ideally fresh and outdoors. Eat sensibly, neither too much nor too little. Sleep enough at the proper hours. Move your body, but rest as well. Attend to what goes in and what comes out. And, crucially, manage your emotional life, for grief and fear and anger, left unattended, will make you ill. That is the medieval regimen. That is, more or less, what a thoughtful doctor might tell you today. The theory beneath it was wrong in every particular, and the advice built upon it was, in outline, exactly right. The last of the 6 deserves particular attention, because it is the one that concerns us tonight. The passions of the mind, the accidentia animi, were understood to be a genuine cause of bodily illness, not a symptom of it. Excessive fear, prolonged sorrow, chronic anger, constant worry, these were held to disorder the humours and to sicken the body directly. The medieval physician believed, quite firmly, that a person's emotional state and their physical health were bound together, each acting upon the other, and that you could not treat one while ignoring the other. That is not a bad thing to have believed in the 14th century. It is not a bad thing to believe now. And so the regimen for the anxious person, stripped of its humoral nonsense, comes down to this: fresh air, good food, proper sleep, moderate exercise, and attention to the state of your mind. Do not sit indoors in the dark. Do not eat badly. Do not lie awake. Do not neglect your body. Do not let the passions run unchecked. It is the sort of advice that sounds too simple to be worth anything, and that is nonetheless, 700 years later, more or less the foundation of everything sensible that anyone can tell you. The medieval physician could not cure your anxiety, but he could tell you how to live, and his answer was not a bad one. Let that ancient sensible list settle gently in the dark. We turn now to what they said about sleep. Sleep was one of the 6, and the medieval world took it seriously, and had a great deal to say about it. Given where you are and what you are doing at this moment, it seems only right that we should linger here a while, in the medieval bedchamber, among the old advice about how a person ought to pass the night. Some of it is strange, some of it is startlingly familiar, and the shape of the medieval night was so different from our own that it is worth describing simply for the pleasure of it. The medieval physician held that sleep was restorative, necessary, and to be had in proper measure. Too little sleep dried and cooled the body and bred melancholy. Too much sleep made one dull and phlegmatic. The proper amount was to be had at the proper time, which meant at night, in darkness, and the sleeper was advised on how to lie, on which side to begin, on when to turn, on what to eat before bed and what to avoid. Heavy food late was discouraged. Strong drink was discouraged, at least by the more sensible authorities. Troubling thoughts before sleep were very strongly discouraged. And here the old books become quite emphatic. Do not go to bed in anger. Do not go to bed in fear. Do not lie down with your worries. Settle the mind first. Compose the spirit. Then sleep. The medieval bedchamber, for those who had one, was a dark place and a quiet one. There was no light after the candle was out, and no light means something rather different in a world without street lamps. It means an absolute, complete darkness, of a kind that most modern people have never experienced. There was no noise but the settling of the house and the wind and, if you were lucky, the rain. The bed was warm, curtained, piled with woolens, shared with family for warmth. The room was cold, the night was long, and dark and silent, and this was simply what a night was. And here is the detail that most delights me. There is good reason to think that medieval people, and pre-industrial people generally, did not sleep through the night in one unbroken stretch as we expect to. They slept in two parts. A first sleep, beginning not long after dark, then a waking period in the deep middle of the night, an hour or so, in which people would lie quietly, or pray, or talk softly with whoever shared the bed, or tend the fire, or simply think. And then a second sleep, until dawn. This waking in the night was not a problem to be solved. It was a normal part of the night, expected, unremarkable, and nobody thought anything of it at all. We know about this from the way people wrote about the night. They referred to the first sleep and the second sleep as ordinary things needing no explanation, the way we might refer to the morning and the afternoon. Prayers were composed for the waking hour between. Physicians gave advice about what to do in it. Lovers met in it. Householders got up and checked the fire in it. It was simply a room in the house of the night, and everybody knew it was there, and nobody was alarmed to find themselves standing in it. And then the light came, gaslight and then electricity, and the evening stretched out, and bedtime moved later, and the long night that had room for two sleeps was squeezed until there was only room for one, and the waking hour in the middle was pushed to the edges where it now surfaces at 3 in the morning as an intruder rather than a resident. We did not lose the capacity to wake in the night. We only lost the knowledge that we were supposed to. I find that thought quite extraordinarily comforting, and I offer it to you now, in case you should wake in a few hours and find yourself staring at the ceiling. For the medieval person, waking in the dark middle of the night was not a failure of sleep, not evidence of a disordered mind, not something to be anxious about. It was simply the quiet part of the night, the hour between the sleeps, and they lay in the dark and let their thoughts drift and waited for sleep to come back, and it came. There is nothing wrong with you if you wake. It is one of the oldest and most ordinary things a human being can do. Let that quiet hour settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the rhythm of the medieval day. We move now from the physician's prescriptions to the medieval world itself, and to the quiet argument that runs beneath the whole of tonight's wander, that whatever the remedies were worth, the shape of medieval life contained real comfort in it, and that some of what it held we have since mislaid. Let us begin with the simplest and largest of these things, which is the rhythm of the day. The medieval day had a shape, and that shape did not change. It began at dawn, because there was no reason to be awake before it, and no light to be awake by. It ended not long after dark, because candles were expensive, and firelight is poor for working. In between, the work of the day proceeded in its known order, the same tasks at the same hours, marked out by the ringing of the church bells at their appointed times. The bells rang whether you listened or not. The sun rose and set. The tasks came round. The day had a beginning and a middle and an end, and every day had the same one. We are not built for the kind of day we now have. This is not a complaint about the modern world, or not much of one. It is simply an observation that a mind formed over a very long time in conditions of great regularity has been placed, quite suddenly, in conditions of very little. Our days have no natural shape. They begin when the alarm decides. They contain no fixed sequence. They end when we finally put down the glowing rectangle, often long after the light has gone. There is no bell. There is nothing to tell us that the day's work is finished and may now be set down, and so, very often, we never set it down at all. The medieval day set itself down. When the light went, the work stopped, because it had to. There was no more that could be done. Whatever remained undone would still be there tomorrow, and there was no possibility of doing it tonight, and so the mind was permitted, by the plain facts of the world, to stop. That is a form of mercy that we have quietly engineered out of our lives. The medieval labourer went to bed with plenty of troubles, but they went to bed with a completed day behind them, and the impossibility of doing anything more about tomorrow until tomorrow arrived. I am not romanticising it. Their lives were hard beyond our imagining, and the work was brutal, and the certainty of the day's shape came bundled with a great deal of hunger and cold and early death that nobody should envy. But the rhythm was real. The day began and ended. The week turned, the seasons came round in their order, and the festivals fell where they had always fallen, and the year was a wheel that had turned in the same way for as long as anyone could remember. A mind can rest inside a rhythm like that. Ours have rather less to rest in. Let that steady old rhythm settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the bells that marked it. Let us stay a moment longer with the shape of the day, and consider the bells, which are among the loveliest things the medieval world possessed, and which we have lost almost entirely. For the medieval hours were not silent, they were rung, and a person going about their work in a medieval village lived their whole life inside a soft architecture of sound that told them, over and over through the day, where they were. The bells rang from the church tower at the canonical hours, the divisions of the monastic day, and though the ordinary villager did not keep the monastic offices, they heard the bells and knew the hour by them. Matins in the deep night, lauds at dawn, prime as the day's work began, terce in the mid-morning, sext at noon, none in the afternoon, vespers as the light failed, compline as the day closed. The names are beautiful, and the intervals are gentle, and the bells came round through the day, whether anyone attended to them or not, marking the hours in the air above the fields. The bells did other work too. They rang for services and for feast days, they rang for weddings and for funerals, and the pattern of the ringing told you which. They rang in warning, and in celebration, and at the death of a parishioner, so that everyone within hearing knew that someone had gone and might say a prayer for them. The bell was the voice of the community speaking to itself, and everybody understood what it was saying, and it spoke all day long, over the fields and through the open doors. Think what it would be to live inside that. To be bent over your work in a field, worrying as people do about money or a sick child or a quarrel with a neighbour, and to hear the bell ring for none across the afternoon, the same bell that rang yesterday and will ring tomorrow, and rang for your grandmother, and to straighten your back for a moment and hear it out. It says, without words, the day is turning, as it always turns. You are inside something larger than your trouble. The hour has come round again, as it will always come round. There is a great deal of consolation in a sound like that. There is also the matter of who the bell was for. Nobody rang it at you. It was rung for the whole parish at once, for the fields and the houses and the road, for the labourer and the lord and the child and the dog. And it did not care in the slightest whether you heard it. It made no request. It carried no news of anything you had to do. It simply announced, to the general air, that the day had reached a particular place in its turning, and then it stopped, and the birds went back to their business. A person could work through an entire life inside that sound and never once be startled by it. And it came round again. That is the other half of it, the returning. Whatever had happened in the morning, none would ring in the afternoon, exactly as it had rung yesterday. Whatever grief the parish carried, Compline would ring at the end of the day, and the day would be over. The bell did not fix anything. It simply insisted, 4 or 5 or 8 times a day, every day, for 1,000 years, that time was passing in an orderly fashion, and would continue to do so after you had stopped worrying about it. I can think of very few sounds better designed to steady a frightened animal, and we have replaced it with a buzz in the pocket. We have nothing of the kind. Our hours are silent, or rather they are marked by notifications, which are the exact opposite of a bell. A bell is impersonal, unhurried, addressed to everyone, and asks nothing of you. A notification is personal, urgent, addressed to you alone, and demands a response. We have replaced a sound that said, "The world is turning steadily," with a sound that says, "Something requires you now." It is not, I think, an improvement, and I suspect the anxious among us feel the difference in their bones without ever being able to name it. Let the sound of that old bell settle gently in the dark. We turn now to prayer and to the strange usefulness of ritual. For the medieval person, the greatest resource against a troubled mind was not the physician at all. It was prayer. And whatever you happen to believe about the metaphysics of the matter, the shape of what medieval prayer did for the worried mind is worth looking at closely, because it was doing something real, and something that a great deal of modern advice has been quietly rediscovering ever since. The medieval world prayed constantly and formally. There were prayers on waking and prayers on sleeping, prayers before meals and after them, prayers at the turning of each hour, prayers for setting out on a journey and for arriving safely, prayers for sowing and for harvest, prayers for the sick and for the dead. Much of it was fixed and formulaic, the same words in the same order, said daily and yearly and lifelong, learned in childhood and repeated until death. The words were not composed fresh, they were received, and they were the same words that everyone else was saying, and that their parents had said. Here is what that gives a frightened person, quite apart from any question of whether anybody is listening. It gives them something to do with the fear. The worry that circles and circles is a worry with nowhere to go. It repeats because it has no exit. Prayer gives it an exit. You take the thing you are afraid of, and you put it into words, and you hand it over, and the words are fixed and ancient and not of your making, and the handing over has a beginning and an end. And then it is done, formally done, and you may get up off your knees. The worry may come back, and you may hand it over again tomorrow, and the day after. But each time it is contained, gathered up, given a shape, set down somewhere. It gives, too, a posture and a breath. To kneel is to be still. To say the words is to breathe slowly and deliberately, in a rhythm not set by your racing heart. To do this in a cold stone church, in the dim light, in the smell of candle wax, with others around you doing the same, is to place your small private terror inside something vast and quiet and old. The medieval person did not call any of this a technique for managing anxiety. They would have been baffled by the suggestion. But that is a good part of what it was doing, and it was doing it rather well. And it gives, finally, the sense of not being solely responsible. This may be the largest thing of all. To believe that the outcome does not rest entirely on you, that there is providence, that the harvest and the illness and the voyage are not yours alone to control, is a profound relief to a mind that is exhausting itself trying to control the uncontrollable. Much anxiety is the mind attempting to manage what cannot be managed. The medieval world offered a place to put that burden down. Whether or not anyone was there to pick it up is a question I shall leave entirely to you. That it was put down is a fact, and putting it down helped. Let that ancient quiet prayer settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the medieval garden. Let us go now into the medieval garden, which is one of the most beautiful things that world produced, and which was understood, quite explicitly, as a place where a troubled spirit went to be mended. The medieval writers say so directly. A garden was for delight and for the recreation of the mind, and the sick and the sorrowful were sent to sit in one, and this was regarded as a treatment. Picture it, a garden of the 15th century, attached to a monastery or a manor, enclosed by high walls of stone or a hedge grown thick. Inside, the ground is laid out in a pattern, beds squared off with low borders, paths of gravel or trodden earth between them. There are herbs in ordered rows, sweet-smelling and green. There are roses trained up the wall. There is a turf seat, a bench of earth with grass and low flowers growing over it, warm from the sun. There may be a small fountain, or a well, or a channel of water running through, because the medieval garden loved the sound of water. There are bees. There are birds in the hedge. The walls keep out the wind and the noise and the world, and the sun comes down into the enclosure, and it is warm, and it is quiet. The medieval writers on gardens are quite clear about what they were for. They speak of the delight of the senses, the green that rests the eye, the scent of the herbs, the song of the birds, the sound and coolness of water, the softness of the grass. They speak of the mind being restored, of sorrow lightened, of the spirit revived. There are recommendations that a garden be provided for the sick to walk in. There are physicians who prescribe sitting among green and growing things. Nobody could have told you why, but everybody knew that it worked. And of course it does work. We have spent the last few decades carefully establishing, with instruments and control groups, what any medieval monk could have told us for nothing, that being among green growing things settles the human animal down, that the sound of water is calming, that birdsong lowers something in us that needs lowering, that an enclosed, safe, sunlit green space, in which nothing is required of you, is one of the more reliably restorative environments a person can be placed in. We have the studies now. They had the gardens. And I am not sure, on balance, that we have come out ahead in the exchange, since a study will tell you that a garden would help you and cannot, in itself, provide one, whereas a garden requires no study at all and simply does the work the moment you sit down in it. The monk on the turf seat had no idea why he felt better. He merely felt better, reliably, every time, and went back the next afternoon, which is all that anybody actually requires of a treatment. It is worth dwelling on the water, because the medieval garden loved it and went to great trouble for it. A channel cut through the beds, a little fountain, if the household could manage one, a well with a stone rim, a pond with fish in it, kept for eating but sat beside for pleasure. The writers mention the sound of it, over and over, the running and the falling and the dripping, as though it were one of the plants. And of course it is exactly right. Running water is the same broadband, unstructured sound as rain and wind, saying nothing, meaning nothing, going on, and the listening brain gives up on it and stands down. They had noticed. They had built gardens around the noticing. And the birds, which the medieval writers also mention, and which they enjoyed with a directness that is rather charming. Birdsong in an enclosed garden in the morning, they say, gladdens the heart and drives away sorrow. It does. It reliably does, and there is a modest mountain of modern work confirming it. And the monk sitting on his turf seat in 1350 with his eyes shut, listening to a blackbird on the wall, was doing something as sensible as anything in a modern clinic. There is a particular quality to the enclosure that I think matters, and that the walls were doing more work than we might assume. A medieval garden was a small, bounded, safe world, with a clear inside and outside. Nothing could come at you. Nothing was expected. Within the walls the world had been made small enough to be comprehensible, and everything in it was pleasant. for a mind exhausted by a world too large and too fast and too full of possible disasters. A walled garden is not merely pretty. It is a scaled-down world, a manageable one, an afternoon in which the whole of your universe is four walls, some roses, and a sound of water. It is very hard to be afraid in a place like that. Let that walled garden settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the roads and to walking. The medieval world walked. This is such a plain fact that it barely seems worth stating, and yet it may be the single largest difference between their daily experience and ours, and it bears directly upon the troubled mind. They walked everywhere, all the time, for hours, over years, for their whole lives. And walking, as it happens, is one of the finest things a worried person can do. Consider the scale of it. The medieval peasant walked to the fields and back, walked to the mill, walked to the market in the next village and home again, walked to church, walked to visit kin, walked behind the plough all day. A journey of 10 miles was a morning's business, undertaken without comment. Pilgrims walked hundreds of miles across the country and thousands across the continent. Everybody walked, in all weathers, on roads that were mud in winter and dust in summer, and thought nothing whatever of it. A medieval person who lived to 50 had walked a distance that would take them round the world. Now, the medieval physician did prescribe walking, in his fashion, as moderate exercise, one of the 6 non-natural things, warming and drying and good for the balance of the humours. He was right, as usual, for the wrong reasons. But nobody needed a prescription. The walking was simply what life was made of. And so, entirely without meaning to, the medieval world administered to its whole population, every day, one of the most effective and best evidenced treatments for a troubled mind that anybody has ever found. They dosed themselves with it constantly and never knew they were doing it. There is something about walking in particular, the pace of it, the rhythm, left and right, the same as the pulse and the breath, which seems to unpick a knotted mind in a way that sitting still never does. The scenery going slowly by, giving the eye somewhere to rest that is not your own thoughts. The tiredness at the end, honest and physical, which makes the body ask for sleep rather than the mind refuse it. And the fact that a walk has a shape, a going out and a coming back, so that the mind that sets out anxious quite often arrives home having somehow, without any effort, set the thing down along the way. The pilgrimage was this made sacred, a walk with a destination and a meaning, taken by people who were often walking away from grief, or towards a hope, or in search of an answer. They walked for weeks. They arrived changed, and they explain the change by the holiness of the shrine at the end. And we might explain it differently, by the weeks of walking and the open air, and the company of strangers, and the enormous unhurried simplicity of having nothing to do all day but go forward. The shrine may or may not have helped. The road certainly did. Let that long, quiet road settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the work of the hands. There is another accidental medicine that the medieval world administered constantly and never noticed, and it is this. Almost everybody, almost all of the time, was doing something with their hands. Physical, absorbing, repetitive, useful work. And that too, as it happens, is a good deal better for a worried mind than most of what we have replaced it with. Consider what medieval work actually consisted of: digging, reaping, threshing, spinning, endlessly, at the drop spindle, walking about the house, weaving, kneading, milking, carving, shaping wood, hammering iron, cutting stone, sewing, mending, plaiting, building. The work was physical, and it was skilled, and it was rhythmic, and it occupied the hands and the eyes, and enough of the mind to keep the mind from wandering into worse places, and it produced, at the end, an object that had not existed before: a loaf, a furrow, a length of cloth, a wall. This is not nothing. It is in fact a rather precise description of the conditions that quiet the human mind. Repetitive physical action, requiring skill but not anxiety, with a visible result. The mind hooked into the hands, the hours passing without notice, and something real at the end of them. People pay money now to have this experience for an evening. They call it a hobby, or craft, or a class in pottery, and they find that after 2 hours at the wheel, their thoughts have gone quiet in a way that nothing else achieves. The medieval world had this from dawn to dusk. It was called being alive. The spinning is the example I keep returning to, because it was so constant. A medieval woman spun, with a drop spindle, in every spare moment, while walking, while watching children, while talking, whenever the hands were otherwise idle. The making of thread was endless, and the spindle went everywhere. It is a soothing, rhythmic, half-conscious action. The twist and the draw and the wind on, and a woman might do it for 6 hours a day for 60 years. Whatever else that life contained, and it contained plenty of grief, it did not contain the specific modern misery of sitting still with a racing mind and nothing to do with your hands. I do not think medieval work was pleasant. It was exhausting, and often it was performed in cold and wet and hunger, and it went on until the body broke. I would not wish it on anyone. But there is a particular kind of anxious suffering that requires an idle body and an active mind, and the medieval world made that combination nearly impossible to achieve. Their bodies were used up and their hands were full. Whatever they lay awake worrying about, they lay awake having spent themselves, which is a different and easier kind of lying awake than ours. Let that patient handwork settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the people they lived among. The medieval word for it, or one of them, was patience, and it did not mean what we now take it to mean. It did not mean waiting pleasantly for a bus. It meant the deliberate, difficult, practiced bearing of what has to be borne, a virtue you worked at across a lifetime, in the way that one works at a craft. It was taught, it was admired. A patient man was not a passive one. He was a man who had learned to carry a weight without flinging himself about, and everybody around him knew how much that cost, and thought better of him for it. We have no equivalent virtue, and I think we feel the lack of it. We have resilience, which is a word out of engineering and suggests bouncing back to your original shape, and we have coping, which is what one does badly. We do not have a widely admired skill of enduring, and so when something arrives that simply cannot be fixed, and every life contains several, we have no practiced muscle to meet it with, and no word of praise for the person who meets it well, and we experience the unfixable as a scandal rather than as a season. This is the engine room of modern anxiety, or a great part of it. Not fear of the thing itself, but the endless, exhausting scanning for the thing, the belief that vigilance will prevent it, the conviction that to stop worrying would be to abandon our post. The medieval person believed that the important things were in the hands of God and the weather and the king, and none of those would consult them, and so worrying about them was pointless, and they had a word for the right response to that, which was patience. It cost them something, that acceptance. It cost them the impulse to improve their lot, but it bought them a quietness of mind we might look upon with something like envy. Let that ancient acceptance settle gently in the dark. We turn now to a world in which everyone expected to suffer. Here is a strange thought, and one worth turning over slowly. The medieval world was a great deal harder than ours, and full of griefs we can barely comprehend, and the people in it expected exactly that. And there is a form of relief in expecting it that we, in our comfortable and disappointed age, have entirely mislaid. Nobody in the Middle Ages was under the impression that life was supposed to be pleasant. The Church told them, constantly and explicitly, that this world was a vale of tears, a brief and difficult passage, and that suffering was the ordinary condition of the human creature and not a scandal. Every sermon said so, every burial said so, the evidence of their own eyes said so. Children died, harvests failed, Plague came, the winter was cold, the work was hard, and then you died too, quite young by our standards. Life was hard, and everybody knew life was hard, and nobody had been promised otherwise. Now, if you expect life to be hard, then a hard life is simply life. It is not an outrage. It is not evidence that you have gone wrong somewhere, or that you have been cheated, or that everyone else has been given something you were denied. You suffer, but you do not suffer the additional and quite separate agony of believing you should not be suffering. That second layer, the suffering about the suffering, is enormous. It may in fact be larger than the first layer, and it is very largely a modern invention. We have been promised comfort and health and fulfillment and a life of meaning and pleasure, and we see, or think we see, other people obtaining these things effortlessly. And when our own lives turn out to contain pain and boredom and disappointment, as all lives do, we conclude that a mistake has been made, that we are failing, that everyone else has the trick of it. And so the ordinary sorrows of a human life, which are unavoidable and which everyone has always had, arrive freighted with shame and bewilderment, and are made twice as heavy. The medieval peasant, freezing in a bad winter, was cold. The modern person, unhappy in a warm flat, is unhappy and also ashamed of being unhappy, and cannot understand why they should be unhappy, given the flat. I am not recommending misery, and I am not suggesting we lower our expectations of medicine or comfort or justice, which have been raised at enormous cost and to enormous benefit. But there is something in the old view worth keeping. Life contains a certain irreducible quantity of hardship. It always has. It is not a sign that anything has gone wrong. Everybody you have ever met is carrying some of it, and always was, and the expectation that we should be exempt is a recent, strange, and rather cruel idea that makes an ordinary sorrow into a personal catastrophe. Let that old plain expectation settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the medieval world's remarkable memento mori. I promised you a gentle night, and I am about to introduce a skull, so let me reassure you at once that this is going to be far more comforting than it sounds. The medieval world thought about death constantly, deliberately, and in a spirit that we would find morbid, and that they found, of all things, calming. It is one of the strangest and most useful things they can teach us, and there is nothing frightening in it. The phrase was memento mori, remember that you must die. And the medieval world remembered, everywhere and always. There were skulls carved into tombs and painted in the margins of prayer books. There were paintings of the dance of death, in which death takes the hand of the Pope and the King and the ploughman alike, and leads them all off together. There were manuals on the art of dying well, which were bestsellers. The dead were buried in the churchyard in the middle of the village, and you walked past them to go to church, and the bones of the long dead were dug up and stacked in charnel houses where you could see them. Death was not hidden, it was furniture. To us this seems ghoulish. To them it was the opposite. It was a settling thought, and they returned to it deliberately when the mind was agitated. Because when you hold your own death steadily in view, a curious thing happens to your other worries. They arrange themselves. The quarrel with your neighbour, the money you owe, the thing you said last week and cannot stop thinking about, the fear of what people will say, all of this is placed beside the plain fact that you will die, and that everyone you know will die, and that the same has been true of everyone who has ever lived, and that they managed, and it is all quite all right. The anxious mind is, above all, a mind that has lost its sense of proportion. It has taken some small thing and inflated it until it fills the whole sky, and it cannot see round it. What the medieval memento mori does is provide the largest possible object for comparison, and set it down next to the small thing, and let you look at the two of them together. It is very difficult to remain in a panic about a social embarrassment while genuinely contemplating your own mortality. The one simply cannot survive contact with the other. The medieval world knew this, and used it deliberately, and it is free, and it works, and it is available to you right now in the dark. There was a specific practice attached to it too, which they took seriously and which we have entirely abandoned. A person of the later Middle Ages was expected to prepare for death, to think about it in an orderly fashion, to set their affairs in order and forgive their enemies and make their peace. And there were popular little books explaining how to go about it. The point was not to be gloomy. The point was that a thing you have looked at squarely and thought about calmly and made some preparation for loses a very great deal of its power to terrify you at 3 in the morning. What we do instead is refuse to look at it at all, and so it waits for us in the small hours, ambushing the unprepared, exactly as any unexamined fear will. And there is one more consolation folded into it, which the dance of death made plain. Death takes the Pope and the King and the ploughman by the hand, all together, all in the same dance. It is the great leveller, and the medieval world found that thought bracing rather than bleak. Whatever you are lying awake comparing yourself with tonight, whoever it is you believe is managing better than you are, is walking the same road, at the same speed, towards the same door. You are not behind. There is no race. It was never a race. And there is more comfort in it still, because the medieval mind held not only that you would die, but that everyone had died, all those uncountable millions before you, and that they had all been just as frightened and just as certain their troubles were singular and unbearable, and that they had all come through into the same quiet in the end. There is companionship in that. You are not the first person to lie awake at 3 in the morning with your heart going. Every single one of them did too, and they are all resting now, and in the fullness of time so will you, and none of it will have been as important as it felt. That thought terrified nobody in the 14th century. It put them to sleep. Let that steadying old thought settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the fire. Let us sit down now, for a while, in front of a medieval fire, because the fire was the centre of the medieval world, in a way that nothing is the centre of ours, and because staring into a fire is one of the oldest and best treatments for a troubled mind that our species has ever devised. The fire was in the middle of the room, or against the wall in a hearth, and it never went out. It was banked at night, the embers covered over, and woken in the morning, and a household that let its fire die entirely had to go and beg a light from a neighbour, which was an embarrassment. Everything happened around it. The cooking, obviously, but also the eating, the talking, the mending, the spinning, the telling of stories, the sitting in the evening after the light had gone and before sleep. It was the only warmth and, once the sun was down, the only light. Everybody faced it. Think about what an evening was then. The work is done because the light has gone. There is nothing further to be accomplished today. The family is gathered in a small ring in the dark, facing a fire, and the light of it moves on their faces, and beyond the ring is cold and darkness, and there is nothing out there that concerns you. Someone is talking, someone is turning a spindle. The fire shifts and settles and throws a spark. This goes on for 2 or 3 hours, every single night of your life, and nothing at all is required of you, because there is nothing that can be done in the dark. We do not have this, and we badly want it. This is why people pay a great deal of money for wood-burning stoves in centrally heated houses. It is why the crackling fire is one of the most watched things on this very platform, and why a great many of you may have one playing quietly in another window right now. Firelight moves in a way that is random but not startling. It is warm. It is bright without being sharp. It demands nothing and gives something, and there is a very old part of the brain that knows a fire means safety, means the night is held off, means the others are here. Notice too what a fire does to a room full of people. It gives them all a place to look. Nobody has to hold anybody's gaze. Nobody has to perform attention. The talk can go slack and start again, and the silences are not awkward because everyone is doing something, which is watching the fire. Sitting shoulder to shoulder facing the same warm thing is one of the oldest and easiest ways for human beings to be together, and it asks nothing of the shy or the sad. A person who could not have borne being looked at could sit in that ring all evening and be perfectly comfortable, and be, without anybody making a business of it, not alone. And then it goes down. The fire is not permanent, and everybody in the room can see the day ending in it, quite literally, as the flames drop and the embers dull and the light shrinks back. There is no ambiguity about when the evening is over. The fire tells you. It is banked, and the room goes dark, and everyone goes to bed, because there is nothing else to do and nothing else to look at. Our own evenings have no such mechanism, and glow on at full brightness until we tear ourselves away, and we wonder why the mind will not power down. The medieval physician, incidentally, would have approved entirely, though for his own strange reasons. Warmth combats the cold, dry humour of melancholy. Firelight cheers the spirits. The gathering of company disperses sorrow. Sit the troubled patient by the fire in the evening among their kin, he would say, and let them be warmed and diverted, and their black bile will be tempered. He was, once again, right. Not because of the bile, which does not exist, but because a warm fire, in a dark room, among people who love you, at the end of a long day, is very nearly the best thing there is. Let that low fire settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the sounds of the medieval night. I want to spend a little while with the medieval night itself, and with what it sounded like, because sound is doing an enormous amount of work upon the anxious mind at all times, and the sounds available to a medieval person at 3 in the morning were entirely different from the ones available to us. Here is what they could hear: the wind in the thatch and around the corners of the house, rain, when it came, falling on thatch, which is a softer and rounder sound than rain on slate or glass, the fire, ticking and settling as it went down, the breathing of the people beside them in the bed, an owl sometimes, a dog somewhere across the village, and then another one answering, the creak of timbers cooling, livestock in the byre or, in the poorest houses, at the other end of the same room, and, before dawn, the birds starting one at a time and then all together. That is very nearly all. There was nothing else to hear. No engine, no plumbing, no fridge, no distant road, no aircraft, no siren, no notification. The night was made of wind and rain and fire and breathing and birds. And I would ask you to notice that this list is almost exactly the list of sounds that a modern person, unable to sleep, will search for on their telephone and play through a speaker in a dark room in the hope of quieting their mind. We have spent a fortune reconstructing, digitally and imperfectly, the ordinary background noise of a medieval bedchamber. There is a reason those sounds work, and it is not sentimental. They are what is called broadband sound, unstructured, without pattern, without meaning, and the listening part of the brain can find nothing in them to attend to, and eventually gives up and lets you go. A voice would keep you awake. A siren would keep you awake. Rain cannot, because rain is not telling you anything. It is the sound of nothing happening, going on, and the vigilant animal in the back of the skull hears it, checks it, finds no information in it, and slowly stands down. The darkness deserves a word of its own, because it was total in a way we now have to travel a long distance to find. When the fire was banked and the shutter closed, there was no light. None. Not a standby lamp, not a street light edging the curtain, not the grey wash of a city sky. A hand in front of the face was invisible, and the body responds to that with an old and reliable chemistry, sliding down into sleep as the light goes, the way it has done since long before there was anything worth calling a mind. We have flooded our nights with light, and taken the darkness away from ourselves, and then gone looking for it in a bottle. The medieval sleeper lay in the absolute dark, in a warm bed, among warm bodies, having walked and worked all day until their body was heavy, in a house where nothing whatever could happen until morning, and listened to rain on the thatch. I am not going to pretend their lives were enviable, but that particular hour, on that particular night, with the fire banked and the rain coming down and nothing to be done until light, that is about as good as the conditions for sleep have ever been arranged in the whole history of our species, and they had it every night, and they did not know it. Let those old soft sounds settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the things they told each other in the dark. There is one more thing the medieval evening contained, and it is the thing that you are, at this precise moment, receiving from me. And so it seems only right to acknowledge it. In the long dark hours between the end of the work and the coming of sleep, medieval people told each other stories, and the telling of a story to a person who cannot sleep is one of the oldest medicines there is. They had no books, most of them, and could not have read them if they had. What they had was memory and voices and long dark evenings that had to be filled with something. So they told the old tales, saints' lives, which were full of marvels, fables of beasts who spoke, local stories about the hill and the ford and the standing stone, ballads, sung, the doings of kings and knights, much embroidered, ghost stories, which they liked very much. The same stories, over and over, told by people who had heard them from people who had heard them, worn smooth as river stones by the retelling, and everybody in the room already knew how they ended. That last part is essential, and it is the whole secret of the thing. The story that soothes is not the exciting new one. It is the one you have heard before. A mind that is anxious is a mind that is trying to predict, scanning ahead for danger, and a familiar story disarms it completely, because there is nothing to predict, you already know. The mind is given something to follow, gently, with no stakes at all, and it follows, and it lets go of whatever it had been gnawing on, and in following it, grows tired, and somewhere in the middle of a tale it has heard 40 times it slips quietly under. This is why children ask for the same book every night, and are furious if you skip a page. It is why the sleepless adult puts on a program they have seen 5 times rather than the new one everybody is talking about. It is why, I suspect, a great many of you have listened to a video on this channel more than once, and drifted off before the same chapter each time, and never heard the end of it. There is no shame whatsoever in any of that. You are doing precisely what a medieval household did around its fire, and what human beings have done in the dark for as long as there has been dark, and there have been human beings. Notice also that the story is told aloud, by a voice, to a person who is not required to respond. That is not a small thing. Reading demands work of the eyes and the will. A screen demands attention and gives it back with interest. But a voice in a dark room speaking to a half-listening person demands nothing whatever. You may follow it or not. You may miss a paragraph. Nobody will ask you afterwards what happened, and it makes no difference to the voice, which will simply go on in the same unhurried way, whether you are with it or not. That permission to attend imperfectly and let go without consequence is the exact permission that a worried mind cannot give itself and desperately needs. The medieval physician, who I have been rather hard on tonight, would have understood this perfectly. Diverting tales, he would say, gently told in a warm room, will draw the mind from its sorrowful preoccupation and dispose the spirits to rest. Prescribe a story to the wakeful patient. It is, out of all his prescriptions, perhaps the only one that has come down to us entirely unchanged, still working, still free, still requiring nothing but a voice in the dark and someone half listening. Let that old told story settle gently in the dark. We turn now to the accounting, and to what they truly got right and wrong. We have wandered a long way tonight, and it is time to draw things together and be honest about what we have found, because I have been telling you a rather two-sided story, and I do not want to leave you with the wrong half of it. What did the medieval world actually know about the troubled mind? Let us do the accounting plainly. They were wrong about the cause. Completely, entirely, and unsalvageably wrong. There is no black bile. There never was. Every diagnosis was a fantasy. Every reading of the urine was a nonsense. And the stars have nothing to say about the state of your mind. The theoretical apparatus of medieval medicine was a magnificent, elaborate, internally consistent structure built upon nothing at all, and it stood for 2,000 years, and it was wrong the whole time. They were wrong, and sometimes badly wrong, in their treatments. The bloodletting weakened people who needed strength. The purges emptied people who needed feeding. The stones did nothing. The astrology did nothing. And in the worst cases, for those whose suffering was most severe, they did things that were not medicine at all but confinement and cruelty. And those people were failed utterly by the world they lived in. And we should not gloss over that with talk of lavender. But they were right, over and over, about what to do. Sit in a garden. Walk. Work with your hands. Do not be alone. Be among cheerful people. Listen to slow, gentle music. Sleep in the dark, at proper hours. And do not go to bed angry. Do not brood in a shut room. Smell something sweet and breathe slowly. Eat well, but not too much. Attend to your passions, because they will make you ill if you neglect them. Keep the rhythm of your days, and when the fear is very great, remember how small a thing you are and how briefly here, and let the size of that thought put the other thought in its place. Every single item on that list is good advice. Not one of them would embarrass a thoughtful person today. They arrived at all of it by reasoning from a fiction, in the way that a man following an incorrect map may still arrive at the right town, and the map does not become correct because the town was there. But they got to the town, and the reason, I suspect, is that they were watching people. Over centuries, they noticed that the sorrowful improved in gardens and worsened in dark rooms, that the fearful were eased by company and harmed by solitude, that music helped and brooding did not. The theory was invented afterwards to explain what had already been observed. The observations were sound. The explanation was rubbish. That is a much commoner shape in the history of human knowledge than we like to admit. Let that honest accounting settle gently in the dark. We turn now to something I want to say directly. I want to step out from behind the history for a moment and speak plainly, and then we shall go back to the medieval world, and I shall carry you off to sleep. But this needs saying, and it will not take long, and I shall say it as gently as I know how. If you came to this video tonight because you are anxious, genuinely and painfully so, and you are lying there hoping that a medieval remedy might be the thing that finally helps, then please hear this. It will not be. There is nothing in the 14th century that can help you, and I have not been offering it to you as though there were. The old remedies were mostly useless, and some of them were dangerous, and I have deliberately not told you how any of them were made, and I would ask you sincerely not to go and find out. Some of those plants are still growing in hedges, and they are still perfectly capable of killing a person who is looking for peace. What I can tell you is this. You are living in the first age in the whole of human history in which someone can genuinely help you with this. Not soothe you, not distract you, not sell you a stone to wear against your breastbone. Actually help. There are people who understand what is happening in a frightened mind far better than any physician in any furred robe ever did. And there are treatments that work, and they are available, and reaching for them is not a weakness or an indulgence or a failure. It is simply the thing to do, in the same way that a person with a broken arm goes and has it set. If tonight's wonder has done nothing else, let it do that. Go and talk to a doctor, or to someone qualified and kind. The medieval peasant would have given anything for that door, and you have it, and it opens. And in the meantime, take from the medieval world the things it did get right, because you may have them for nothing. Go outside, walk a long way, sit among green things, do something with your hands until the hours vanish. Sit with people who make you laugh, and let them. Put on something slow and quiet in the evening. Let the day end. Sleep in the dark. And when you wake at 3 in the morning, as we all do, remember that people have woken at 3 in the morning in every century that has ever been, and that it is the oldest hour of human worry, and that the sun has always, without exception, come up. That is all, and I shall not lecture you further, and I am sorry to have interrupted the drowsiness. But there may be someone listening who needed to hear it, and if there is, then I am glad I said it, and I hope they will do the kind thing for themselves in the morning. Now let us go back to the Middle Ages, where the fire is burning low, and let me carry you the rest of the way to sleep. Let that plain word settle gently in the dark. We turn now, gently, to the long thread that joins us to them. Before we let the medieval world go tonight, let us think for a moment about the people themselves, the actual frightened human beings on the other end of all these remedies, because they are easy to lose behind the humours and the star charts and the amusing business with the urine flask, and they were as real as you are. Somewhere in the 14th century, a woman lay awake in the dark worrying about her children. She had 4 and 2 had died, and the youngest had a cough, and she lay in the crowded bed listening to him breathe and counting the breaths. She had said her prayers. She had put lavender under the bolster because the wise woman had told her to. Nothing had helped, and she lay there in the enormous darkness with her heart going, and outside the rain came down on the thatch, and eventually the sky greyed and she got up and made the fire, because that was what the morning required. Somewhere a young man on the eve of a journey could not sleep for fear of the road. Somewhere an old man lay awake reckoning up his sins and afraid of what came after. Somewhere a girl about to be married to a man she had met twice stared at the ceiling. Somewhere a monk in a cold cell fought the same thought over and over and could not put it down. Somewhere a farmer watched the rain that was ruining his harvest and lay awake calculating what would be left and how long it would last and what would happen when it was gone. They were exactly like us. That is the thing I keep arriving at, and it is the reason I wanted to make this episode at all. The furniture of their lives was unrecognizable, and the contents of their heads were the same as the contents of ours. The same 3 in the morning arithmetic, the same catastrophes rehearsed in the dark, the same helpless love for people they could not protect, the same shameful private conviction that everyone else was managing better. They had it all, and they had it without electric light, without a diagnosis, without anybody to tell them that what they were feeling had a name and was common and would pass. And they came through the night, most of them, most nights, and got up in the morning and did the work. That is what I would have you take from them. Not the herbs and not the stones, and certainly not the lancet, just the plain fact of them, millions upon millions of ordinary frightened people lying awake in the dark across 700 years, and getting up, and going on, and being buried in the churchyard in their turn, without ever once knowing that a person very like them would be lying awake tonight, in a warm room they could not have imagined, thinking about them kindly. Let those old worried souls settle gently in the dark. We turn now to our last quiet thought. Our long wander is nearly done, and there is one final thought to hold before we let it all go, and it is a warm one. It is simply that the thing you may feel tonight, if you feel it, is a thread that runs back unbroken through every century that has ever been, and that you hold one end of something very old. The worry is old, older than the medieval world by a long way. The Romans wrote about it, and the Greeks wrote about it, and the writers of the Psalms wrote about it. The sleepless night, the fear in the chest, the mind that will not be still. Long before anybody wrote anything, there were people lying awake in the dark. It is not a symptom of our century. It is not the fault of our machines. It is part of the equipment, an old alarm bell installed in the human animal long ago, for reasons that made excellent sense at the time, and it rings, sometimes, when there is nothing there. And the comforts are old too. That is the part I find lovely. The fire, the walk, the garden, the familiar voice telling a familiar story, the hand of someone who knows you, the sound of rain on a roof, the music played slowly in the evening, the plain fact of morning arriving. Not one of these is modern. Not one of them was invented, or discovered, or improved upon. They were simply always there, and they always worked, and every generation has found them again in the dark as though for the first time, and used them, and passed them on without saying anything. So when you lie there tonight, know that you are not doing anything new, and you are not doing anything wrong. You are in an enormous, silent, invisible company. The medieval mother with the coughing child, the monk in his cell, the frightened girl, the farmer watching the rain. They are all lying awake with you 700 years back, in the same dark, and they came through it, and the morning came, and it will come again for you, as it has come every single time, without exception, since the world began. They are all long asleep now, every one of them, the physicians in their furred robes, and the patients who put up with them, the women who spun, and the men who walked, the bell ringers and the storytellers, and the tenders of walled gardens, all of them worried, at some point, about something, and none of it matters now, and they are resting, all together, under the long grass. Let that gentle thought settle over you now, soft and calming in the dark, as we let the whole medieval world go at last, and drift away into sleep. We turn now, at last, toward rest. So let it all go now, gently, the whole strange old world we have wandered through tonight. Let it fade the way the past fades, the way the centuries dissolve into a soft and shapeless distance, the physician with his flask and his star charts, the lavender under the bolster, and the cool stone against the breastbone, the harp played slowly in a warm room, the bells over the fields, the walled garden with its bees, all growing dim and quiet and far away, until there is only the soft dark, and your own slow breathing, and the gathering tide of sleep. Let the medieval world grow quiet and distant now. Let the fire in the little house burn down to embers and be banked for the night. Let the last bell ring for Compline across the dark fields and fall silent. Let the garden empty and the roses close and the bees go home, and let the whole long-ago world settle into the deep stillness of the vanished past. All of it long over now, all of it long at rest. They are gone, every one of them, the worried and the sleepless of that distant age, their fears long since ended, their long nights long since passed into morning and then into silence. Whatever kept them awake 700 years ago has been resolved, one way or another, for a very long time. Let them rest, gently, in the peace of the vanished centuries. And now, at last, so may you. Feel the warmth and comfort of your bed, soft and safe around you. Feel how far you are from all that old hardship, how safe, how comfortable, how gently held by the quiet of your own night. There is nothing you need to carry from any of it, nothing to trouble you, no remedy to remember, and no worry to keep hold of. Only the soft dark and the deep quiet, and the simple comfort of your own warm bed, many centuries away from everything we have touched upon tonight. Feel your breathing slow, and your body soften, and the small cares of the day loosen their grip, one by one, and drift away into the warm dark, until there is only you, and the quiet, and the deepening peace. And if there is something you have been carrying tonight, some small worry you brought to bed with you, you may set it down now. Not solve it, just set it down, on the floor beside the bed, where it will keep perfectly well until the morning. Nothing can be done about it in the dark. That was true in the 14th century, and it is true now, and there is a great mercy in it. The dark is not for solving things. The dark is only for resting, and you have permission, tonight, to do nothing else at all. The whole long journey we have travelled, the whole strange old world of cures and bells and gardens, can simply be released now, dissolving into the soft dark, leaving you weightless and at peace, drifting gently down into sleep. And if any last image lingers at the edge of your thoughts, some low fire in a dark room, some rain falling on old thatch, some slow music in a warm hall, let it grow soft now, and slow and distant, the way a dream dissolves as you slip past its edge into sleep. The images dimming, the world fading, the whole medieval world dissolving quietly into the warm and shapeless dark. You can simply let it drift away, like the day itself, like the centuries themselves, out into the quiet and gone. Good night, traveller. The worried people of the medieval world are long at rest now. All their long nights ended, all their fears long since passed into the silence of the deep past, across the great gulf of the centuries, and you are safe and warm and well, here in the gentle quiet of your own night, many hundreds of years away. Rest easy, sleep deep. I'll be here, somewhere in the quiet, when you wake.